Hello everyone. Tonight we will be not rushing, not scrolling, not pretending that everything is fine. Tonight, we're stepping into the quiet after the fire, into a story that still smells like smoke, a story that left marks, but not the kind you see on skin. There was a house. It had a front porch that creaked like it held a secret. It had windows that watched me, and it had walls that remembered more than I ever could. I didn't light the match, but somehow, I'm the one who got burned. They said it was me. They whispered it. Then they screamed it. And when the smoke cleared, I was alone. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I do here. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight? What time is it where you are? I always read the comments. I always want to know who's listening, even if the rest of the world wasn't. Now, turn off the lights, maybe turn on the fan. Just a little hum in the background. And let's get going tonight. I moved there in spring. You know the kind. When the air still bites in the morning, but the sun forgives it by noon. When everything feels like a beginning. Fresh, gentle. Like the world's giving you one more shot to start over. That's what I thought I was doing. Starting over. After a divorce that felt more like a slow collapse than a clean break, I packed up what was left of my pride, grabbed my daughter Grace, and drove 5 hours to a town so small, you could miss it if you blinked too long. They called it Larchwood. Charming little name, right? Population? Just enough to notice when you're new. Just enough to make you feel like maybe, just maybe, this time could be different. Grace was quiet during the drive. She had her headphones on, but I could tell by the way her fingers drummed the window that she didn't want to be there. Can't blame her. She was 16. She wanted friends, noise, familiarity. And instead, I was dragging her to a place where the biggest event of the month was the church pancake breakfast. Still, I told myself, we needed this. A reset. A cottage on the edge of town had popped up on my search one night. A little yellow house with green shutters and a crooked fence. It looked honest. Like it had survived things. Like it had stories to tell. I fell for it immediately. Grace didn't. She looked at the peeling paint and the overgrown lawn and said, "Looks like it's been crying." I laughed. But deep down, I knew what she meant. The realtor, a nervous woman named Beth, told me the house had been on the market for a while. Said the last owner had left suddenly, no forwarding address. No one in town seemed to know much else. That should have been my first clue. But when you're desperate for a fresh start, you don't ask too many questions. You just sign the papers, put the key in the door, and hope the past doesn't follow you in. I wanted to believe we were safe now. That Larchwood would be gentle with us. That my daughter and I could rebuild something here. Brick by brick. But from the moment we crossed that threshold, I felt it. Not evil, exactly. Just watched. And later I'd wonder if maybe the house had been crying too, just waiting for someone to listen. The house smiled at me. That's the only way I can describe it. That crooked little cottage at the edge of the woods. It looked like it was trying to smile. The way the shutters leaned in like eyes squinting from laughter. The way the front steps dipped in the middle like they were tired from dancing. It wasn't perfect, but it was trying. And I needed that. There was a quietness to it too. Not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that wraps around you. Software worn, like an old sweater in late October. Grace didn't say much. She dragged her suitcase over the threshold, looked around once, and headed straight for the room farthest from mine. Teenagers, right? I let her be. I spent the first few days fixing things. Nothing major. Just little signs of neglect. A loose floorboard here, a faucet that groaned before it gave water. a back door that refused to close all the way. But even while I painted and scrubbed and repaired, I kept feeling like I was being watched. Not in a creepy horror movie way, just noticed, as if the house itself was paying attention. Every time I passed the old mirror in the hallway, I swore I saw a flicker of movement behind me. Not a shadow, not a figure, just something. I'd laugh it off, tell myself I was tired, that I was imagining things. And maybe I was, but the house had its own rhythm, its own breath. At night, the wooden beams groaned like they were settling into sleep. In the early morning, the windows fogged with condensation in shapes that looked a little too much like fingerprints. Grace said nothing, but she stopped opening her curtains. She taped a towel over the mirror in her room. Said it made her feel weird. I didn't push. I was too busy trying to feel grateful, to ignore the stories I'd started to hear. See, when you're new in a small town, people size you up quickly. They smile, they wave, but they don't always mean it. And when I'd mention where I was living, that yellow house on Pine Hollow Road, people would pause, smile tighter, say something like, "Oh, that place." I'd ask what they meant. They'd shrug, change the subject. One woman at the post office whispered that the house had been bad luck for years, that it had memories. I laughed, but that night, I found the hallway mirror turned slightly, facing the stairs instead of the wall. I hadn't touched it, neither had Grace. I straightened it, went to bed, and told myself again. It's just an old house, but even houses, I was beginning to realize, can grieve. It started with a knock. Not urgent, not loud. Just 3 soft taps on the front door, like someone trying not to be heard. It was just after sunset. That hour when the sky forgets what color it wants to be. And the house, as always, had already started humming. The beams creaked above me. The wind slipped through the eaves like it knew a secret. I opened the door. No one. Just a folded piece of paper resting on the welcome mat. No envelope, no name. I picked it up, unfolded it with fingers that felt suddenly colder than the air around me. 3 words, scrawled in uneven, hurried handwriting. Leave before winter. That was it. No explanation, no signature. I stepped out onto the porch, looked both ways down the road. Nothing but the dark curve of trees and a single street lamp flickering like it had stage fright. I stayed there a minute, listening, but the silence said nothing back. Inside, Grace was in the kitchen, making a sandwich with her earbuds in. I didn't show her the note, not yet, because I was still trying to believe that this was all just small-town weirdness, that people in places like this said cryptic things for fun, that maybe it was just some prank, a dare. But the next morning, at the little grocery store on Main, the cashier looked at me like she knew. She didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Her eyes lingered too long. On my hands, my face. Like she was memorizing me for some reason I couldn't understand. When I told her the address for my loyalty card, she flinched. Actually flinched. Then forced a smile so tight, it might have cracked her teeth. "You're in the yellow house," she said. Not a question. I nodded. "And?" I asked. She just said, "Be careful." Some places remember more than they should. That was the second warning. I told myself, again, people just like stories, urban legends, ghost gossip. But when I got back home, I found Grace sitting on the stairs, pale, shaking slightly. "There was someone outside my window," she said. I ran out. Nothing. Just trees and wind and the ache of something missing. We checked the locks. We checked them twice. And that night, we both slept with our doors closed tight. Lights on, curtains drawn. The next morning, I found another note. Slipped under the back door this time. This one said, "The fire wasn't the end." I stood there, bare feet on cold tile, the silence pressing on my shoulders like weight, and for the first time since we'd moved in, I felt afraid. Not of ghosts, not of legends, but of the people who never quite said what they meant. Because warnings whispered behind smiles are louder than screams when you're the one listening closely. They didn't stop smiling. That was the worst part. No glares, no shouting, just smiles. Tight-lipped, overly polite. Like everyone in town had agreed on a script and no one dared break character. But underneath it, you could feel it. The shift. The glances that lasted half a second too long. The pauses in conversations when I walked past. People talk in small towns, everyone knows that. But in Larchwood, they didn't just talk. They watched. It started small. Grace came home from school quieter than usual. She said nothing when I asked about her day. But that night, I noticed she'd deleted her social media. All of it. When I asked her why, she just shrugged. Said she didn't feel like dealing with people. I knew that tone. That meant something had happened. It wasn't until I went to pick her up early one afternoon that I saw it. Written in red marker across her locker. Firestarter's daughter. I froze. The hallway was empty, but the word felt like it echoed, burned into the beige metal like a scar. I cleaned it off, my hands shaking, furious, but mostly just tired. When we got home, I asked her about it. She didn't want to talk. But eventually, she told me some of the kids were saying the house was cursed. That we'd brought the fire back. That bad things followed people like us. People like us? I wanted to scream, but I didn't, because Grace was already unraveling. And if I fell apart, there'd be nothing left to hold her together. The neighbors stopped waving. At the coffee shop, the barista accidentally forgot my order. Twice. At the library, 2 women stood behind me in line and whispered, loud enough for me to hear, that I looked too calm for someone with that kind of past. What past? I had no past here. But the town had decided to give me one. It didn't matter that I worked, that I paid bills, that I smiled first. The gossip came quicker than truth ever could. I began noticing footprints in the dirt near the back door. On mornings after the wind had erased all others. Just one set, going nowhere. We didn't have pets. We didn't have guests. I'd hear knocks. No one there. See lights flicker. Power company said everything was fine. Grace stopped sleeping in her room. She brought her blanket down to the couch. Said the dreams were worse upstairs. I didn't ask. And the worst part? I started believing it might be me. That maybe I had brought something here. Not fire, but something quieter. Something cracked. People don't always say what they think, but they say enough. And in Larchwood, they were already building the bonfire. They just hadn't picked the night to light it. Yet, it started with a smell. Faint at first. Like someone had left something on the stove too long. Burnt sugar, a flicker of wood smoke, something singed and bitter hiding behind the air freshener I sprayed every morning. But the stove was off. Every window was closed, and the fireplace hadn't been touched since the day we moved in. Still, the smell came back. Always around twilight, always in the hallway by the stairs. Just for a moment, long enough to catch it, long enough to wonder if it had always been there. Then the cold started. Pockets of it, like walking through an invisible doorway. I'd be folding laundry in the living room, then pass through the hallway and feel it hit me. A drop in temperature so sharp it made my eyes water. I checked the vents, the insulation. I even brought in a guy from town to look at the heating. He said everything was fine, but his eyes kept drifting to the attic door. He never said why. And then, Grace. One night I found her standing at the top of the stairs, eyes open, but she didn't see me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Grace?" I whispered. She didn't blink, didn't turn. Just stood there, one hand resting on the wall like it was guiding her. I stepped closer. Still nothing. Then, as if someone else had pulled her backward, she turned slowly and walked. Not down the hall to her room, but toward the attic. "Grace!" I ran, caught her wrist just before she reached for the pull cord. She gasped like someone waking from underwater. Tears, shaking, confusion. I thought I heard something," she said. "I thought someone was calling me." I didn't let her sleep alone that night. Neither of us spoke about it again. But something had shifted. The next day, I opened the attic. Just to see. Just to prove to myself that it was empty. And it was. Mostly. Just an old rocking chair, a pile of yellowed newspapers, and a photograph, tucked into the corner of the floorboards. It was black and white. 2 figures, a woman and a child, standing in front of our house. The woman's face was clear, eyes wide, mouth unsmiling. The child's face was burned, not physically, but blurred, smudged, like someone had tried to erase them from memory. On the back, in faint ink. Before the fire, I put the photo back. That night, the smell returned, stronger, thicker. Like smoke clinging to hair after a campfire. But crueler. And this time, it didn't fade. The fire hadn't started yet, but something inside the house was already burning. It started with a smell. Faint at first, like someone had left something on the stove too long. Burnt sugar, a flicker of wood smoke, something singed and bitter hiding behind the air freshener I sprayed every morning. But the stove was off. Every window was closed, and the fireplace hadn't been touched since the day we moved in. Still, the smell came back, always around twilight, always in the hallway by the stairs, just for a moment, long enough to catch it, long enough to wonder if it had always been there. Then the cold started. Pockets of it, like walking through an invisible doorway. I'd be folding laundry in the living room, then pass through the hallway and feel it hit me. A drop in temperature so sharp it made my eyes water. I checked the vents, the insulation. I even brought in a guy from town to look at the heating. He said everything was fine, but his eyes kept drifting to the attic door. He never said why. And then, Grace. One night I found her standing at the top of the stairs, eyes open. But she didn't see me. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. "Grace?" I whispered. She didn't blink, didn't turn, just stood there, one hand resting on the wall like it was guiding her. I stepped closer. Still nothing. Then, as if someone else had pulled her backward, she turned slowly and walked, not down the hall to her room, but toward the attic. "Grace!" I ran, caught her wrist just before she reached for the pull cord. She gasped like someone waking from underwater. Tears, shaking, confusion. I thought I heard something," she said. "I thought someone was calling me." I didn't let her sleep alone that night. Neither of us spoke about it again, but something had shifted. The next day, I opened the attic. Just to see. Just to prove to myself that it was empty. And it was. Mostly, just an old rocking chair, a pile of yellowed newspapers, and a photograph, tucked into the corner of the floorboards. It was black and white. 2 figures, a woman and a child, standing in front of our house. The woman's face was clear, eyes wide, mouth unsmiling. The child's face was burned, not physically, but blurred, smudged, like someone had tried to erase them from memory. On the back, in faint ink. Before the fire. I put the photo back. That night, the smell returned. Stronger, thicker, like smoke clinging to hair after a campfire. but crueler. And this time, it didn't fade. The fire hadn't started yet, but something inside the house was already burning. The fire started just before dawn. I remember the sound first, not the crackle, but the snap, like a branch breaking underfoot, sharp, final. Then came the heat, thick, choking heat that seemed to rise from inside the walls. I woke up coughing, my sheets damp with sweat, the air buzzing like static. Smoke poured from the stairwell, dark, hungry, moving faster than it should have. I screamed Grace's name. No answer. For a moment, the fear knocked the breath out of me. I ran, found her curled on the couch downstairs, still asleep. The fire hadn't reached her yet. I pulled her up. She staggered, coughing, and we made it out the front door barefoot, barely dressed, into the blue fog of early morning. We stood in the yard, shivering, watching the house, the one I had tried so hard to love, glow from within. Flames licked the windows. Smoke rolled from the roof like a slow-motion wave. And I stood there, feeling everything collapse. The fire department came quickly. Too quickly. Almost as if they'd expected it. They saved the frame. Most of the damage was in the back room and the upstairs hallway. No one was hurt. At least, not physically. Grace wouldn't speak to me. Not out of anger, but shock. She just stared at the house like it had betrayed her. The officers asked questions, took notes, walked through the ruin like they'd seen it all before. One of them, a man with a gray mustache and no name badge, leaned in close and asked, "Were you burning anything? Candles? Incense?" I shook my head. "Nothing. We were asleep." He didn't write that down. The next day, a woman from the local paper called. Wanted a quote. Wanted to know how it felt to survive a second tragedy. Second? That word clung to me all day. And then, the rumors started, whispers at the market, a voicemail from my boss saying it was best to let things cool down. A neighbor walked past and muttered, "Some people bring their demons with them." By the end of the week, the insurance company called, said they'd received an anonymous tip, that I might have set the fire myself, for money, that I was in debt, that I was desperate. I wasn't. But suddenly, I was defending myself from a fire I didn't start to people who had already decided I was guilty. The smoke had cleared, but I was the only one still choking. Grace wouldn't go back inside. We stayed at a motel on the edge of town, eating instant noodles and not speaking much. I tried to comfort her. She said, "I dream about burning things." I didn't ask what she meant, because by then, the town had made up its mind. And in stories like this, someone always has to be the witch. They turned on me fast. Faster than the fire. Faster than reason. Faster than I thought people were capable of. It started with silence. The kind that fills a room before someone tells you you're no longer welcome. The cashier at the grocery store stopped making eye contact. My dentist's office rescheduled indefinitely. Grace's school suddenly had concerns about her emotional well-being. I tried to call it what it was, just nerves, just a rough patch. But the truth is, it felt like we were being erased. People crossed the street when they saw me coming. My messages to friends went unanswered. And one afternoon, someone spray-painted one word on the fence outside the cottage. Witch. In red. Dripping. I washed it off, hands shaking, water freezing on my sleeves. But it didn't come off completely. The outline stayed. So did the message. The local newspaper ran a piece that week. Didn't mention my name. But it didn't have to. "New resident, new fire, old questions," the headline said. Underneath, a photo of smoke curling over treetops, and a quote from an anonymous source. "Some people bring bad luck. You can feel it." They were talking about me. And everyone knew it. Even the fire report, which hadn't come back yet, didn't matter. They didn't need proof. They had belief. Grace tried to go back to school. She came home early, eyes puffy. Said someone slid a drawing into her locker, a stick figure standing in flames, labeled, "Your mom." I wanted to scream, to knock on every door and demand answers. But who would listen? People don't defend what they're afraid of, and they were afraid of me now. One day, a woman I barely knew stopped me outside the pharmacy. She looked around first, then leaned in. "You should leave," she whispered. "This town doesn't forgive easily." I stared at her. "Forgive what? I didn't do anything." She didn't answer. Just gave me a pitying look, like I was already gone. That night, Grace asked if we were cursed. I told her no, but I didn't say it with enough conviction, because part of me was starting to wonder about the warnings, the mirror, the notes, the photo in the attic, and most of all, about the fire that started in a sealed room while we slept. I thought about calling the police. Again. But I'd already become the story. The villain. The woman who burned her own house for reasons no one could quite name, but all seemed sure existed. So I waited, watched, and wondered when they'd come for us next. Not with fire, but with the coldness of people who've decided you don't belong. Because sometimes, the worst kind of burn is the one that leaves no scar. Just smoke where trust used to be. I needed answers. Not from the town. They'd already made their choice. I needed the truth from the only place that hadn't lied to me yet. The house. Even burned, it still stood. Charred walls, ash-stained ceilings, the smell of smoke clinging to everything like memory. I walked through it during the day, never at night, with a flashlight and gloves, peeling back the layers. Looking for something, anything. Old houses collect things, stories, secrets, sometimes bones. The attic was mostly untouched by the fire. Strange, considering how close it had been. I returned to the rocking chair, the dusty newspapers, the old box of nails rusting in the corner. And then, under a loose floorboard, I found a bundle, wrapped in linen, yellowed and fragile. Inside were more photographs, dozens of them, black and white, some nearly faded to nothing. But one stood out. The same woman and child from the earlier photo, standing in the same place, only this time. The child's face was clear and terrifyingly familiar. It looked like Grace, not just a resemblance, identical. My heart caught. My breath froze. It wasn't possible, but it was true. I dug deeper, went to the county archives, drove an hour to the nearest town so no one would recognize me. I asked for property records, anything on Pine Hollow Road. The clerk was helpful. Too helpful. She didn't flinch when I gave the address. Just nodded and disappeared into the back. Came out with a single thin file. Inside, a fire report from 1979. The same house, same back room, same damage pattern. Victims, a woman named Evelyn Hart and her daughter, Miriam. Cause of fire, undetermined. Rumors had spread back then too, that Evelyn was troubled, that she practiced dark things. No charges, no trial, just whispers and ash. The town buried it. The records were almost erased. Almost. I stared at the names. Evelyn, Miriam. I flipped through the file again, and at the very back, a police note scribbled in red pen. Child's body never recovered. I sat there a long time, in the silent back room of that courthouse, feeling the floor beneath me tilt. Was Grace connected somehow? Had something followed us here, or were we following it? Back home, I confronted the house again. The mirror in the hallway had cracked, just a hairline split running straight through the center. A seam in reality. I touched it. My reflection stared back, but it wasn't quite me. And behind her, in the glass, a child, standing very still, wearing my daughter's face. That night, I couldn't sleep, because for the first time, I wasn't sure if the danger came from the town or from inside my own blood. I couldn't sleep, not even for a minute. The house was quiet, too quiet, like it was waiting. Every creak felt intentional. Every gust of wind outside felt like breath against the windows. I sat at the kitchen table, Evelyn's diary open beside me, trying to stitch together truth from ashes. And then I found the name, not Evelyn, not Miriam, Grace, scrawled in the margins of one of the later entries, almost like an afterthought, almost like a prophecy. Grace will remain. I see it. She's already halfway here. My hands went cold. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't imagination. This was design. I thought back to the way Grace had looked in the mirror, the way she whispered to someone I couldn't see, the way she stared at that hallway like it held a door only she could open. And the town, they knew. They'd always known. That's why Beth had sold me that house without blinking. Why the cashier had flinched. Why people smiled through their teeth but never let me in. Larchwood had secrets, not just about Evelyn, but about what they'd done to her, about how they'd taken her child, or hidden her, or watched it happen and said nothing. And now, it was happening again. The woman at the pharmacy had said, "Some people do things to protect themselves." Now I understood. They hadn't just buried Evelyn's past. They'd sacrificed it to protect their clean streets, their quiet porches, their pancake breakfasts and prayer circles. And I had wandered right into it, with a daughter who looked too much like a ghost and a heart too tired to run. The next morning, I confronted one of the older women at the church, a Mrs. Dunley, who'd lived in Larchwood her whole life. I asked her if she remembered Evelyn Hart. Her eyes darkened. The smile dropped. "I don't speak of the dead," she said. "But she's not dead, is she?" I whispered. She didn't answer, but her hands started shaking. "She was different," she said quietly. "She saw things." "Or maybe," I said, "she just saw you." Mrs. Dunley turned and walked away, but her silence screamed louder than any confession. That afternoon, I returned to the house. It felt heavier than before, like walking underwater. The hallway mirror was cracked even deeper now, the seam branching like a river across the glass. Grace was in her room, door closed, no sound. I stood outside for a long time, hand hovering just above the knob, afraid of what I might find, afraid of what I might not. Because somewhere between the fire and the whispers, between the town and the mirror, I had begun to wonder, was Grace still my daughter? Or was she simply the next one? It happened again. A second fire. This one smaller, contained. Just the back porch this time. The one that faced the woods, but it was enough. Enough to wake us in the dark, to send us stumbling out into the night, barefoot on cold dirt, our lungs catching smoke that didn't belong. Only this time I saw him, a figure, running, through the trees, dark coat flaring behind him like wings. He didn't look back, but I knew it wasn't a shadow, wasn't a ghost. It was someone real. I chased. Didn't think, just moved. Branches scraped my arms, roots grabbed at my ankles, but I kept going through the clearing, down the slope, until I saw it. A red scarf caught on a branch, still warm. The same one I'd seen on the man at the general store. The one who never spoke, who always stood too still. I picked it up, heart pounding so hard it drowned out the wind. When I returned to the house, Grace was already inside, curled on the floor, rocking slightly. "The house is trying to tell you," she whispered. "Tell me what?" But she didn't answer. Her eyes were glass, fixed on nothing. The firemen arrived late this time. Too late, and they didn't look surprised. One of them, the same man with the gray mustache, glanced at the scorch marks, then at me. "Back porch," he said flatly. "Could have been worse." I held out the scarf. "Someone said it." He didn't even blink. "Hard to prove." And just like that, they left. But I had the proof now. Not just the scarf, but the knowledge, the intent. Someone in this town wanted us gone. Not the house, not the fire. United States. They needed someone to blame, to point at, to keep the stories alive and the shadows away from their own doorsteps. And if I hadn't found that scarf, if I hadn't seen that figure running, maybe I would have believed them. Maybe I would have kept thinking it was me, that I was unraveling. But no, this time, I had the truth. A truth they'd buried before. They hadn't just let Evelyn burn. They'd watched, and when she screamed, they turned up their radios. Now it was my turn. I took the scarf to the sheriff's office, demanded an investigation. He looked at it, nodded once, said they'd follow up. But his eyes told a different story. He wasn't going to do anything, because he already knew. They all did. Grace watched from the car as I stormed out of the station. When I got in, she turned to me slowly and said, "They're afraid of her. That's why they hate us." "Her?" She looked at me, but didn't answer. I drove home in silence, white-knuckled on the steering wheel. The house came into view, so still, so quiet. But I didn't go inside right away. I just sat there, watching the cracked glass of the upstairs window glint in the dying sun. And I realized the truth wasn't just in the house anymore. It was in the woods, in the fire, in them. And if I wanted to survive this, I had to stop asking for permission. I had to burn their lies down before they burned us again. I confronted him the next day. The man with the red scarf. He worked at the hardware store, sweeping the aisles, never speaking, never looking up. I walked straight to him, held out the fabric, watched his eyes freeze. "I saw you," I said, voice low, level, louder than the hum of the fluorescent lights above us. He didn't run, didn't flinch, just stared at the scarf. "It wasn't supposed to catch that fast," he finally muttered. My breath caught. "So you did start it?" He nodded. "Once. I didn't want to hurt anyone, just convince you to leave." I blinked. "Why? Why us?" He glanced around the store. Empty, except for us. Then he whispered, "Because it's her house." My stomach turned. "What do you mean?" "Evelyn, she never left. And when your daughter walked in..." He swallowed hard. "She recognized her." I felt dizzy. "She's just a girl," I said. He shook his head slowly. "She's not just anything. She's the echo. The one that was taken, or left behind. No one really knows." His voice grew softer. "But the house does." I stared at him, waiting for him to laugh, to pull back the curtain of crazy. But he didn't. Instead, he looked sad. "She keeps choosing girls like her," he whispered. "Girls who don't belong to the town. Girls it won't miss." My voice cracked. "So, you tried to scare us out?" He nodded. "We don't want another fire." Too late for that. I left the scarf on the counter and walked out. Didn't look back. Back at the house, Grace was sitting in front of the hallway mirror, legs crossed, hands in her lap. She didn't move as I entered. Didn't speak. I sat beside her. Together, we looked at our reflections, and for a moment, they didn't look like ours. I saw Evelyn behind us, clear as day, her eyes, her sorrow, her claim. And I understood. The house didn't want to burn. It wanted witnesses. It wanted someone to hold the memory, to carry the weight, to tell the truth it had been denied. I reached for Grace's hand. She let me, and for the first time in weeks, her skin was warm. No chill, no ghost, just her. Maybe it had all been enough. Maybe we'd finally been heard. But as I stood that night looking out over the town, watching the windows light up one by one, I knew they still didn't believe me. To them, I was the unstable one, the outsider, the flame they couldn't control. But I didn't care, because I'd seen what they buried, and I knew what fire really meant now. It wasn't destruction, it was revelation. It lit up the lies, it made shadows scream, it forced secrets into daylight. I didn't burn the house, but I would have. If it meant finally telling the story that no one else dared say out loud. Because sometimes, the only way to survive a haunted place is to haunt it back. It's quiet now. The kind of quiet that comes after the storm. Not peaceful, but emptied. We moved. Not far, just enough. A little town with no history, no whispers, no mirrors we're afraid to look into. The house on Pine Hollow still stands, charred in places, boarded up, but breathing. Sometimes I think about going back, to see if the mirror still holds her reflection, to ask her, Evelyn, what she really wanted. But I don't. Some doors, once closed, don't need to be opened again. Grace is better now. There's color in her cheeks again. She laughs, sleeps through the night. But every once in a while, I catch her staring at her own reflection too long. Not afraid, just listening. And I remember. I remember what it means to be the one people point at. To be blamed. To carry smoke on your skin from fires you didn't light. They said I burned that house down. That I brought bad luck, that I stirred something dark. But I know the truth. I walked into a place filled with other people's silence, inherited their guilt, their fear, their shame, and it tried to swallow me. But I didn't let it, because survival isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like staying, asking questions, protecting someone who doesn't even know she's in danger. Sometimes survival is standing still while everyone else runs away. That's the lesson, I think. That when people refuse to look at their own past, they'll always find someone else to burn. And if you're that someone, don't let them rewrite your story. Tell it yourself, out loud, even if your voice shakes, especially if it shakes. Because what haunted me the most wasn't the fire, or the ghosts, or the town. It was almost believing them, almost handing over my truth in exchange for silence. But I didn't, and neither should you. If you've made it this far, thank you for staying, for listening, for letting this story live somewhere outside my bones. And if this story made you feel anything, anger, grief, hope, or just the echo of something you didn't know had a name, I hope you'll come back for the next one, because the world is full of quiet houses, and sometimes all they need is for someone to listen. Good night. They came for us in the morning, not with torches, not with ropes, but with a knock, firm, rehearsed, like the sound of decisions already made. 2 officers and a woman with a clipboard from Child Protective Services. Grace was still in bed. I stood barefoot at the door, heart pounding, hearing the words before they were said. "There's been a report," she told me, calm, too calm, like she'd practiced it 100 times. "About your daughter's safety." I laughed, dry, hollow. "From who?" "We can't say. Of course not. I let them in, because what choice did I have?" Grace sat on the couch, legs tucked under her, arms crossed, stone-faced and silent. The CPS woman asked questions about our routines, about the fire, about the rumors. Grace didn't speak. just stared at the hallway mirror, unblinking. When the woman asked if she felt safe with me, Grace hesitated. Not because she didn't, but because the question itself fractured something. It suggested another reality, a reality where I was the danger, where I was the thing that needed to be run from. She finally nodded. "Yes," she said. "I feel safe." The woman wrote something down, but her eyes didn't agree. They left an hour later. No action taken. Not yet. But I knew that knock would come again. And next time, they might not leave without her. That night, I searched the house from top to bottom. Ripped open drawers, moved furniture, pulled at the edges of wallpaper like I could peel away the lies. I found it in the basement, a second bundle, wrapped in canvas. Inside, a diary. Evelyn's. The woman from the mirror. From the fire. The entries were scattered, faded in places. But her handwriting was unmistakable. She wrote about her daughter, how she was changing, how the town stopped speaking to them, how they whispered about curses, about madness. But the most terrifying entry was one word, repeated over and over, pages and pages of it. Mine. I sat on the floor for hours, reading her words, her dissent, her desperation, and I realized she hadn't been evil. She'd been broken by fear, by loneliness, by the weight of raising a child in a town that decided she was already lost. And now, they were doing it again. Same house, same fear, same story, different woman, me. When I looked at Grace that night, her face was still hers. But something behind her eyes had shifted, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Whispered through mirrors, carried in smoke. I wanted to hold her, pull her back into the warmth of this world. But I was starting to wonder if I ever really had her to begin with.